Roxo Media House.
Welcome back to another episode of Facing the Frogs. I am Jamie Plunkett alongside Coach David Beaudin, and we are here to preview TCU's upcoming opponent, the SMU Mustangs. Coach, I'm really excited about this film session with you. We had such a good time breaking down Tarleton State film, and I am ready to hear what you've got about the SMU Mustangs. Just like last time, folks, we're going to take a look at the first offensive possession of SMU in their game against Maryland, and then we'll be taking a look at Maryland's first offensive possession to see what we can learn about SMU's defense. Coach, any other notes before we jump right into film?
No, I it's interesting. I think in a game that I think everyone said, hey, they overlooked Maryland, right? I think you're going to find right from the jump here that SMU certainly went after Maryland, right? Just the opposite. And so, it's going to be interesting to take a look at, how they set up their offense and defense and things we're going to see here in a week.
All right, Coach, let's take a look at the first play from scrimmage for SMU's offense.
Yeah, so, right off the bat, they want to get their quarterback, Mordecai, involved here. And so they take a shot down the field. Really what they're doing is, again, a lot of eye candy in the backfield. This is sort of their offense. Rhett Lashie, obviously was the offense coordinator for Sonny Dykes before Garrett Riley over at SMU. There's some familiarity there. But they're similar. That is similar to Riley in the sense that they want to do a lot of the same concepts with a bunch of different looks. And so here what they're trying to do is create three levels. Okay, so if we let this run here, you can see that the three levels are going to high-low in two different spots. So up top, they're running a skinny post. And so really the first read here is this safety. So honestly, the ball should have went here. He's got to step on him. This receiver needs to do a better job getting up closer to the hash. Quarterback can hang it out there. But they're off of that one. What I'm thinking is during the week, this is their opener, right, to the game. So obviously they've rehearsed it a bunch, and it's gone to this dig route, this square in here quite a bit. Really the ball should have came back down. If they weren't going to read this one here, if they're going to go high-low, it's really high-low to the motion guy, right? And clearly he's got plenty of room to run. But what happens is that they don't do a great job in terms of backfield action. You can see here it's a really cheap play fake. The only time, Jamie, that they should do this, right, just forget about the play fake almost, is when you've got a blitz on, right? Mm-hmm. But Maryland here, you can see it's a four-man rush. SMU still has a six-man protection. So that tells us right away, look, this is a team that's going to protect their quarterback. A lot of teams will just free release the back no matter what, right, and leave five guys there. And certainly against a TCU defense that is going to, present a lot greater athletes, honestly, than they have. They're going to sit, in a six-man protection. You see that right off the bat. But cheap play fake, it doesn't hold the linebackers, and, they're bailing out of there. So, play one, shot down the field, and it brings up a 2nd and 10, which I think is really interesting. You go into 2nd and 10, and they jump right into quads. So again, we talked about at the onset here is, look, this is a team that's going to go after, Maryland, right? They're not looking ahead to TCU at this point. They're going to go after them. They line up in quads, so you can see four receivers down at the bottom here, and then you got one back up top. All right, I think this is supposed to be a kind of a pump fake and go by the top receiver. So it's a screen and go look. All right, the reason they don't go down bottom here is because you keep an eye on this safety. So this safety now is working over towards the quads, which gives them a one-on-one matchup. I think one thing you can deem from this film is SMU still has some great offensive skill athletes, right? That's an area where they can match up, truthfully, with a lot of, Power 5 programs in that area. It makes a lot of sense. Coach Dykes and staff did a great job recruiting the greater Dallas area. There's certainly a lot of those skilled players that are still there, and so that's an area where I think they're strong. I think on the offensive line, not as I don't want to say they're below or subpar, but I think that's an area that you can get after them a little bit.
So looking at these first two plays, obviously they're spreading it out. They're airing it out, which is very similar, like you said, to what Dykes and Garrett Riley like to do at SMU. Rhett Lashie comes from that same system, so it makes a ton of sense that he's going to use these weapons in a similar fashion. But if you're TCU's defense and you're seeing this on film right now, what's going through your mind as far as slowing this offense down that really is intentional about airing it out and getting down the field in big chunks?
Yeah, I think, and we're going to see here that they're throwing the ball. Their plan is to throw the ball all over the place out the gate. But I think it's also a tell that they're not as confident in the run game, obviously, right? So this is something where you can sit back. Obviously, the structure of TCU's defense is more of has the capability to be in a drop 8 quite a bit. But we haven't seen a lot of that in the first 2 games, right? They've at least brought the 4th rusher most of the time. At least, if not a 5th guy. But I think this is a game here where you can sit back and kind of dare them and then just keep things in front of you. Because clearly they just want to take shots. Anytime they have a one-on-one matchup without a safety over the top, you better believe, with a really good quarterback and receivers, they're going to take those shots a lot like Tarleton State did, this past game.
So, thinking about that then, the way that TCU was able to disrupt Tarleton State, obviously SMU is a much better program than Tarleton. They've had much more success, their FBS program, but the Frogs were able to disrupt things along the offensive line, especially with Dominic Williams, Terrell Cooper. That whole squad really along the line was disruptive for most of the night. Is there an opportunity there to see something similar in Dallas on Saturday? Yeah,
for sure, and that gives you that's the reason why they can go drop 8, right? You can't do that unless you have the horses up front to create pressure without bringing extra bodies, and certainly TCU has proven, again, two maybe subpar opponents, so it's tough to tell that they can continue to do this. But at least for right now, those 3 up front, even if they make wholesale changes, they've done that as well along the defensive line, and continue to get pressure with just 3 guys.
Thinking about the secondary then on the other side of things, there's going to be a lot of responsibility there for Josh Newton, Travis Hodges-Tomlinson, and maybe even some backup corners. Noah Daniels and Ish Burding are going to have to get in there. Keon Stewart as well, get into the mix there a little bit, probably in coverage. Is this going to be kind of the first real opportunity that we're going to have to see some of TCU's corners and man?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. This is a group that does not believe in the run game, right? So they're going to put the onus on their quarterback, a veteran guy, like I said, great skill positions. So, yeah, they're going to get tested, and like you said, they're going to see a lot of bodies out there in the back half because it's going to be somewhat of a track meet.
All right, so let's keep going through the series and see what else we can see.
So it brings up 3rd and 10. In real time, everyone really thought this was another called sprint out pass, but really what it is they use a false cadence. We've seen this before, but the quarterback go ahead, and if he gets any kind of jump, which he does here from Maryland, then they automatically have a sprint out call to their right. Okay, this is built in. So the skills know, depending on how many receivers are there, that they're going to run some kind of sprint out concept. Okay, and the rules are if there's 3 receivers, they know exactly what they're doing. Okay, if there's 2 and there's 1, it's going to be different, right? So if there's just 1 receiver, he would run a deep out. All right, to the formation, but they get him to jump. The interesting thing here is if you watch the offensive line, they're complete statues, right?
Nobody's moving.
Yeah, that's right. And that obviously is by design. And the reason for that is for the officials to leave no doubt that they weren't the ones that jumped, right? It's definitely the defensive line. We're not going to move. And a lot of times, honestly, from a defensive perspective, you get thrown off by it. You don't know if you should rush or the play's blown dead. So SMU uses that to their advantage. They get Maryland to jump early. They're at home, crowd's behind it. And so they knew that, they'd be gunning for them, especially on a 3rd and 10 situation. So it was a smart call, and they were able to get a freebie here on the offsides by the defense. And so they get a big gain, and now again they're in a 1st and 10 situation. Once again, we haven't seen a run yet. Okay, and if there's any question that they weren't going to come in and go after him. They run now. It's 1st and 10. They just crossed the 50, and the first thing they call is a reverse flea flicker, right? So, again, it's funny to read all these pundits and listen to them after this game and say, oh, they must have been focused on TCU. I don't think that's the case when you see a reverse flea flicker on the first time you cross the 50-yard line.
Is this one of those things similar to the 2-point conversion TCU ran against Tarleton where it's like we're going to put this on tape just so TCU has to maybe spend a couple minutes in practice this week looking at it and working on it?
I think there's something to that. I think it's a little different than the 2-point conversion just because there's so many different variations off of that, right?
Sure.
That you're going to have to prepare for. This one here, I think they're just looking to score, to be honest with you. The problem with the play itself, and we don't need to dive too deep into it because it is SMU, we just want to get a feel for it, but it all happens too fast, right? It's here in the boundary side, and if you look down here, as soon as he gets, as soon as the exchange happens here on the flip to the reverse, he's giving it to the quarterback. And so what that does is that, no one's buying it back here. So you get the safeties to bail out, the corners are bailing out, and so the quarterback has to check back down sort of his safety valve on the sideline and end up being incomplete, just throws it out. So while it didn't work, again, it's just another sign that they're going to be super aggressive, and you can certainly expect that versus TCU. I think, their mindset is, as we talked on Dissecting the Frogs this week, about, hey, if you're quote-unquote the lesser team, then you're going to be much more aggressive in your approach. And I think when they're facing Power 5 teams, as they are again this week, that we can expect they're going to come after them.
And talking about their offensive line and then watching a play that develops, even though it happens pretty quickly, it's still just generally a slow developing play. I don't know, is SMU going to have the time to be able to run something like this? I mean, you see two guys are still hitting Mordecai at the end of this play. You got to imagine if that's Terrell Cooper and Dominic Williams, like that, they don't want to risk that too frequently.
Right. Yeah. I think the only thing way you can get around that, Jamie, is with a lot of misdirection, movement, things like that, and trying to. There's two schools of thought, right? If you're the better team, you're going to line up and just physically dominate somebody.
Sure. If
you're the lesser two teams, right, you've got to get creative and try and fool people. So you can either be better or you can fool people. And I think that's what they're trying to do here is just, look, they can't hold up and just line up and get after them. So they have to do some trickery. And part of that is, you have to be able to hold up. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. It's a roll of the dice, but it's the chances that you take when you're the lesser of the two schools. And again, quality football program, SMU, there's no doubt. We all know it, and it's hit close to home here. But I think we're going to see some shots for sure. So now we're in a 2nd and 10 situation, and I believe this is the first run we're going to see from SMU on 2nd and 10. It's an outside zone, which is interesting. I want to go to the end zone here quickly if I could. Okay, they run outside zone to the defensive right, the offensive left, and I want to keep an eye on the SMU left guard here. Take a look here. This might be an area that as you're watching film and guys, for matchups that they like. What happens is, Jamie, they want to run outside zone, which is interesting because, and this is really something to keep an eye on because TCU lines up the same way. Okay, not at linebacker. They'll have the 3 stacked linebackers. More in an arrangement like this, right? The 3 guys. Mm-hmm. This is more of a true odd, kind of like what we've seen, in the Tarleton film on the last, facing the Frogs. But the one thing that's similar is the 4 techniques here that you'll see. So inside shade of the tackle both times. Most teams will run gap schemes. So what is that? Polars, right? They'll run that kind of stuff. They won't run zone, and the reason is. This case, this defensive end from Maryland works out, so it works okay. But normally you have a hard time blocking the 4 on the backside of zone, right? So all these guys are going away, and it just kind of makes sense. They're all working this way. And what happens is this guy has leverage, and he's able to work inside and make the play from the backside. So you don't see it a lot. SMU does it. They handle the backside fine. That's not the problem. The problem is this left guard. When the hip goes away, his eyes should go to this defensive hip right here. Okay, and the minute he goes away, this guard needs to work up, all right, to the linebacker because his combination is working, and we'll see it here. But they're supposed to be working to this linebacker. As soon as he turns his shoulders, okay, this guy's going to step up, and he's at a disadvantage. Mm-hmm. And again, just something to keep an eye on. I don't know. I'm not. I was familiar with the personnel for SMU, but from just watching film, this is a guy I think you can attack a little bit. And we're going to see that show up here in the first drive a couple times. But he comes off late, kind of gets rocked back because of it, and then that linebacker's able to make the play.
And that's Johnny Hodges' side of the field too. When you're talking about TCU from a linebacker perspective, and Jamoy Hodge can shade that way as well. So, is there a possibility then that we're going to see some big plays from Johnny on Saturday?
Absolutely, and he fits that perfectly, right? Linebacker goes away. There's a guy who can fill right now. Both of the guys you just mentioned, right? Hodge and Hodges, guys that can certainly bring something behind it when they show up, right? Really oversized, large, tough guys at linebacker. So absolutely, I think you're spot on here. So we see zone, but they still they managed to pick up 4 yards and end up in a 3rd and 6, Jamie. And once again, we're going to see him go back to the air. This is a brilliant call. This is something that is a staple of the quote-unquote air raid. I think that term gets thrown around too much. I think Coach Dykes is really somebody who's studied under that, but it has a lot of deviations from the traditional air raid. But this mesh concept here is a staple of this offense. And so if you look down here, Maryland gets into a man-free concept. This is a great call versus man-free. So this is something here. You mentioned TCU playing some man-to-man coverage. This is something I'd keep an eye out for. What happens is, the corner up here falls asleep, and he should be following this guy in man-to-man. So now you've got 2-on-1, and it frees up this receiver here. He's able to run free for a huge gain, and it's a really simple mesh play that you want to run with man coverage underneath. Okay, the nice thing about man-free is it's not man-to-man, so they're not bringing 6 guys, they're bringing 5. So it's a 5-man rush. It gives you a little bit more time to deal with. Again, they're in a 6-man protection from SMU. We talked about that in the opening play. And then you'll see the mesh concept. And what I mean by that is these guys are taught, Jamie, and TCU runs this as well, so they'll be used to it from camp. But when you actually run this drill and you start with your walkthroughs and you start in the winter and that kind of stuff, they actually slap 5 going by. That's how you teach the play
okay.
at every level. Without a football, they want to be that close that they're almost rubbing shoulders. And that way, if this was an easy one, but if he was playing man to man, then it creates that rub route on the defender to pop him loose.
Or as defenders like to say, pass interference. Right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Like I said all the time, the offense calls it a rub and the defense calls it a pick or pass interference. So
this is another example then of where awareness from TCU's corners is going to be really important. Hodges Tomlinson and Josh Newton are going to have to be able to identify what's going on here pretty quickly, especially when you consider that your guy in the slot here, number 12, up at the top of the play, is his whole goal is just to get in the way of that cornerback, right? That's
right. Yep. No, that's exactly right. So he's setting a pick from the beginning, right, to free him up. And then, these guys actually don't do a great job being as close as they should be. It doesn't matter as much because, they get a blown coverage up top in this particular play. So, but again, nonetheless, still a big play for SMU. It brings up a first down. And we're going to see the exact same, the only other run play they've had, which is outside zone to the left. Okay, but you're going to watch our guy at left guard here. He's a little green at this spot. And, again, it's an area that we might want to attack. But he gets rocked back. He's got to bring more behind him. And, I think we can look at the end zone here. But, again, this is something to note because TCU is going to line up in this the same front with the 2-4 eyes. You may even see this exact look if they spread them out. TCU has a tendency to put their linebackers out of the box as well. Mm-hmm. They can always fall back and be B-gap players if necessary, which is this gap right here being responsible for in this area. Okay, and then this linebacker is going to go A to A, right? That's normally how that works.
So tell me, in this offensive scheme, for TCU on defense, Nook Bradford at that strong safety position is so critical as in run support. But when you're an offense that likes to spread it out, you have quads out there or trips out there frequently, how much does that impact what a strong safety is able to do as far as run support goes? Yeah,
it's hard. Now for Bradford, it's a little different because for TCU, they have that free runner right in the middle, and that's what's nice about that 3-5-3, right, that they're able to have that extra free runner. But in a normal defensive structure, when you have 2 high safeties, it's virtually impossible versus trips or versus quads look to get involved in the run fit. In fact, if you're doing that, then you're in trouble in the pass game, right? But that is nice about Joe Gillespie's defense is that they've got that extra free runner, I think, which helps them in this case. So I think it's a really good point.
All right, so after another running play that gets them a couple of yards, they're facing 3rd and 3 right here. Coach, what do we see from SMU on this play?
Yeah, so this is the first gap run, okay, with pullers. This is a counter play out of the pistol. All right, so the running back set behind the quarterback, and you're going to see him open up and pull the guard in the tackle for SMU. And this is something you typically see versus this tight front. So when Iowa State started doing this, is the first ones really in the Big 12 to get in that tight defense, that double four eyes. Oklahoma was the first one. Their counter to that with Lincoln Riley was to run the GT counter. Okay, that was kind of and it gave him some trouble. And we'll take a look here, Jamie. Just kind of draw this up and what this looks like. They go to the tight end side, so they bring it. SMU has a tight end in here. They've also got an H back here. So really 12 personnel, one back, two tight ends. This guy, call him a fullback, call him what you will. So, but we'll go with 12 personnel. Everyone's blocking down. So there's that, that tight front again. They're blocking down. He's blocking down. And what's going to happen is, these guys here are going to wall off this backside linebacker. That's what SMU is trying to do. They're trying to create from the puller. They're trying to create a kick here and then wrap the tackle to this linebacker here. Okay, and then this H-back's going to step in and cut off anything backside from when the pullers, vacate. The key here, if you're TCU this week, okay, there's got to be communication between these linebackers. As soon as they see pull, okay, especially double pullers, he's got to give the other linebackers, so whether it's Hodge or Hodges, communicating, depending on what side they're on, okay, a pull call. All right, every defense has it, so he'll yell pull, right? As soon as it happens, and then he'll know where to step up and fit this thing, and usually fits it, takes it on what is inside arm, and then able to get this linebacker over the top. And there's a lot of lines going on here, but we'll take a look at it. So the Maryland linebacker doesn't do as good of a job. He gets over the top. He's able to cause a little pile, but really they get a good strong edge, and they're able to box that thing and force it all back in.
That's a slow first step from that linebacker on our right there. The defense's left.
Yeah, for sure. I agree, and we've talked about this on Facing the Frogs before. At linebacker, you've got it. That's why my guess is here that he didn't get a good pull call from this linebacker here, right?
Okay.
And if he does, and now he's able to step with the correct foot, which should have been his left foot here, and he should be here now, right? So you can meet him and play on their side of the line of scrimmage. So definitely a thing that I know, you'll see TCU all week in walkthroughs, and I'm going to fit this thing over and over again to get this thing right, because I suspect in the defense they're going to line up, they're going to see quite a bit of this.
So for TCU with the odd stack, then what's D Winner's role? We've talked a lot about Hodges and Hodge and what they could do, but what's D Winner's role on something like this? Yeah,
so there's two different – that's a good question. There's two different ways you can approach it. And, Winners – and they've shown both. TCU's shown both. They've either spilled it, okay, which is basically trying to create a car crash in here, okay, coming off the edge to the puller, and that's getting inside the puller. So he wants to get inside the pulling guard and then work up the field, get vertical at that point, but only after he blows this thing up. What that does is it doesn't allow the tackle to wrap. It causes, some sort of
traffic,
muddiness.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And he can't get around and get off to a linebacker. That causes, of course, the ball carrier to bounce it. Now you've got safeties running the alley to make the play. So that's their typical way they've handled gap runs so far early in the year. And then we've also seen them, box it. More like Maryland does here, force the thing back inside. So I think you want to have carry both. The key is you've got to be on the same page, right? Even if you're quote-unquote wrong, you need to be wrong together, right? That's the way you can make it work.
And so that all is kind of prompted then probably by Hodge and whatever he's calling out.
Or whatever the defensive call is. Normally.
Okay.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so defense will have a call to say – whether it's going to be a box player or a spill player at that point.
Gotcha. So SMU gains 2 yards on this play, but they're facing 4th and 1. Let's go to the final play of this drive.
Yeah, I think it's telling. It's 4th and a long one, but, again, they're going to the air. And to me that shows that down in this area, just the amount of confidence or lack thereof they have in their run game, right? So they try and create that rub down below. Doesn't work out so well. He ends up, making a good catch, but it's out of bounds. It's a turnover on downs. So again, I think, after watching the first full series here of the last game for SMU, what are our takeaways, right? I think we look at it and say, okay, these guys are going to be aggressive. They're going to take shots down the field early. They're not afraid to run trick plays. They're not afraid to come right at you. But this is a team that definitely wants to throw the ball and is not as, at least, again, small sample size. We're a few games in, but it seems like, they don't have as much balance as the SMU teams we've seen under Coach Sonny Dykes.
Well, that leads me to a question because SMU is one of the teams that ran for over 200 yards against TCU last year. Is this Is this a scheme difference? Is this a personnel difference? What's going on here? Why are they so unbalanced?
I think a little bit of both. I think they look at their strengths, right? Certainly at quarterback, I think they trust him, and they should. They've got a quarterback there. They've also got Preston Stone as their number 2, who they certainly, he was highly heralded out of high school, and a guy that they believe in. So somebody that if they want to ride on the arm of the quarterback, they've really got 2 there that they feel great about. So that's the first thing. And the same thing with their skill players, their receivers, their running backs out of the backfield. I think they've got some quality guys. So that's it. But I think up front they're still young. I mean, they've got Alon Ali was one of their best linemen. He's obviously over here in Fort Worth this year. Mm-hmm. So they're breaking some guys in up front, and they just don't have the weight and frankly the experience behind them to really get things going, and dominate the line of scrimmage like they had in the past. So that's something that you see if they grow throughout the year. But right now they want to put on their arm of the quarterback. Awesome.
Well, let's switch over and let's look at the other side of the ball and see what SMU does on defense here.
Great.
All right, Coach. First play from scrimmage here. We see SMU lined up in what looks like a base 4-3 defense. What do we see here?
You're exactly right. A lot of times, people say, hey, look, it's a 4 down, and they assume that it means 4 guys with their hand in the ground, right? It has little to do with it. Really just line up in what they call an even front, and that means there's 2 defensive tackles line up over the guards, either in a 2-eye or a 3 technique. SMU has shown both, but they've consistently been this 4 down front. Their linebackers, they'll shade one way or the other. And then their first play, again, they're in quarters. Okay, so if we take a look at that, these 4 defensive backs are all at the same exact depth. Okay, it's a good sign that it's quarters, and what that means is, in the pass game, each of them have a quarter of the field. All right, deep they're responsible for. So all these guys are responsible for a deep quarter. But the second thing it means is these guys and safeties, when you play a quarter defense, okay, you go back to teams that made a living out of it. Bud Foster at Virginia Tech, they used to be, sort of talking about an 8-man front defense, that kind of thing. And then they actually got into here where they got a 9-man defense. Really, in quarters, you can play that, a 9-man front, because they are playing flat-footed, right? It's the first defense we've seen, Jamie, where they're basing out of quarters so far this season.
Okay.
And again, you've had, if you play too high but you play more of a cover 2, then you'll see the corners squatted up here, and those guys are the force players in the run. In quarters, it's going to be the safeties. Okay, so that's something to keep an eye on. How do you block that in the run game? Well, your receivers have to be really good. They do things called push crack, okay? Or some people call it a spy block. And what that is in a normal run, if it's coming your way, they need to come off the ball fast and hard so they can get this corner to loosen up a little bit. Okay, and then from there they go ahead and crack. Okay, and block the safety because that's the run player. So this is something they have to see on the fly. The receivers have to be aware of that. So certainly going to ask a lot of the receivers in blocking the run game. Okay, I think it's telling also defensive end number 9, Nelson Paul for SMU. He's down bottom here. Okay, really good player. He's been a starter now. This is his 4th year. He's a senior. I believe he started all 3 years. Freshman year, he might have been a more of a rotation guy, but it's certainly significant time. And so what they want to do is rattle him right off the bat. You can see Maryland come out here and try and motion in to crack him. Okay, they still don't do a great job. He gets by him. He's pretty quick. Okay, but what I'll say, though, from the linebackers, again, you mentioned these linebackers, and really for SMU, this is an area where they're going to have to improve against a really fast TCU team, okay, and get quicker reads. Right now, you've got that crack, and you've got full flow going, to the defensive right, and these guys, aren't getting out of their stance. They're still kind of stuck in the mud a little bit, right? This linebacker here has to get over the top of all this stuff. The backside linebacker, yes, he's got cutback, but he's got to scrape somewhat, okay, and be ready to fall back. He can't have feet in the mud. So it really hurts him here. You get out in the perimeter. The corner does a really good job recovering for SMU. He understands, okay, we're in trouble here, and he fits it. He does a good job. He fits it to the outside. Okay,
trying to force people back in.
That's exactly right. Yeah. He has to do that. A lot of corners will try and peek their head in here, and then all of a sudden you've got a touchdown. Honestly, so he does a good job, but the rest of his teammates got to join him. And again, I pointed out the linebackers. The next thing I look at is those 4 safeties that we talked about. I think these are guys that you can attack. Okay, you can attack them in the run game, attack them in the pass game. if you're TCU. Okay, they've got to run a J path. Okay, so they've got to run the J. All right, path. They're working inside out. We already said the force is happening outside in. We don't do that here, right? At safety, if you let this thing run, he goes inside instead of getting over the top of this. Okay, he needs to get over the top of the blocker. He doesn't do that, and it's able to create a huge alley here for Maryland right out the gate on play one. Versus this even quarters team.
And then, it looks like just, outside of just going the wrong direction around a defender, it just looks like bad angles from some of the guys in the back end of this defense on this play as well.
There's no question. And so if I'm TCU and watching this thing, I'm saying, okay, how do we get out in the perimeter against these guys and try and create some of these mismatches and, force them to take angles. And clearly they've shown that this is something they're going to struggle with a little bit.
Well, we talked about this on last episode of Facing the Frogs. We've also talked about this when I sat in for Maggie Hale on Dissecting the Frogs after the Tarleton State game about just how much TCU loves to run those jet sweep concepts, the speed sweep concepts. That has to be setting the Frogs up for a little bit of success against an SMU team that looks a little bit slow-footed at linebacker.
You're exactly right. Get out in the perimeter, right, with your athletes. And certainly we know the depth they have at receiver, all the weapons trying to get them the ball and jet sweeps out in the perimeter. And then, Jamie, it kind of leads the segues really nice into this next play on 1st and 10 for Maryland because, what did we see off of that jet sweep last week against Tarleton? And that was the naked, right?
Yep.
And something that, and again, SMU sees it here. They struggle with it. They get full flow. This is not a defense so far. Again, we're 2 plays in, but you just got hit with a big play. A lot of times defensive coordinators, sort of out of frustration, tend to blitz you after this, right? You get hit with a big play. They say, the heck with this. We're going to come after him. SMU stays in this base 4 down, even front. Doesn't bring any pressure, and they're going to stay pretty vanilla. But you're able to see sort of how this is blocked. This is exactly how TCU blocked it against Tarleton. Mm-hmm. So, all offensive lines working down this way. So they call it kind of elephant tail on the backside. They're working this way, and they're going to slip the tight end across the formation. And again, same thing. TCU has already shown this in the playbook. The only difference here for Maryland, and again, this is something that TCU might want to try out as well, but there's no routes going on out here. This is going to the tight end or the H-back the whole time. They're just going to come out here and block for them, and it's almost like a naked screen.
I'm just watching this guy in the slot for Maryland, like crab walk up to the 35-yard line looking for somebody to block.
Right.
And there's just nobody there because everybody, all of the SMU linebackers bite pretty hard on this sweep fake, and that just leaves that flat so wide open. That's
right. No, that's exactly what happens. And he's also doing the same thing, in terms of spying this thing because, he's got to block the most dangerous man, right? Mm-hmm. So I guarantee you when they put out the playbook for this week, they have a big MDM down the middle, most dangerous man. And so, he's undecided whether he needs to take this one or here.
I mean, now they're guys within 5 yards.
That's right. And that's, I guess, the dilemma, but it's a good problem to have if you're Maryland.
Sure.
So Maryland's rolling right here against this sort of kind of a vanilla approach from SMU so far. Brings up another consecutive 1st and 10, and again we've got an even front from SMU. Not a lot of changes, not bringing any more pressure. It's again like we said, it's we'll take a look at the end zone, but you can see there's this line. They're going to line up over the guards. They're going to have their 4 down. Here's 2 ends and without pressure. It's to me, Jamie. I don't know. You at this point you might want to mix it up a little bit, but they do a good job here. Here's our guy Nelson Paul once again, and kind of show you how dangerous he is in the run game. He just disposes of this tight end from Maryland, and he's one heck of a player.
So tell me this, because I know when we talk about the first offensive possession of a game, just how scripted that is, how prepared the offense is for that. But on defense, you can't really script the same way that you would on an offense. So is it strange to you that SMU is being so straightforward on this first offensive possession for Maryland?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. You can. A lot of times what defenses do on the first drive, they obviously want to kind of test things out. A lot of times you will see a little bit more vanilla on the first drive, only because you're feeling out, okay, what's going to be their offensive attack and their game plan. The one thing you can do is you can say, okay, if we get certain personnel or a certain formation, this is going to be our first call.
Gotcha.
Right? And so on down the line. So the first time we see X, we're going to run this. And so that's more of the defensive script on how that, how they set it up. But it is interesting to see, after getting gashed in those first 2 plays. But it does tell you something about their defense coordinator. Say he's not going to panic. He's not going to be somebody that's going to frustration blitz, so to speak.
Gotcha.
And so I think it tells you a little bit that they're a disciplined team, at least from a play calling standpoint, defensively.
Well, let's move on to this next play too. Maryland doesn't have a ton of success on this first drive, but they have marched the ball down pretty successfully here. Now that they're getting close to the red zone, what do they do here that maybe challenges SMU?
Yeah, so I believe this one here, you're going to see that getting an unbalanced formation. Okay, so it does cause some confusion for SMU. It's still early in the year. You start getting an unbalance. Those are things that you don't practice a ton against in camp. Especially if you haven't seen it on film prior. I don't believe Maryland has shown this before, so something a little bit new, and you can see. But again, it's not. You can tell in motion, goes in motion here. You can tell that it's not a man concept because he doesn't run with them. All right, so what the corner's telling SMU here, they're communicating to the safety that, hey, you need to bump this thing and get down the middle of the field. Okay, this tight end's covered, so he can't go out for a pass. So he's on the line of scrimmage. He's off the line of scrimmage. And then they send this guy in motion and really create a quad situation over here with the running back instead of the receiver on the backside. But this does cause some confusion for Maryland. For SMU. They sort of luck out here. You get some good pressure, able to check it down. They got to make the tackle there, but it still brings up a 3rd and 3 for Maryland. Except on 3rd and 3, they end up going offside. So next play we're going to look at here, they actually end up, once it's all comes out in the wash, they end up in a 3rd and 8 here on this next play we'll take a look at before we wrap it up. So this is the last play on the drive, the last offensive play for Maryland on this drive. We'll go ahead and take a look. But this is the first pressure we see from SMU, Jamie, but it's a zone pressure. Okay, so they zone blitz here, and what that means is, if you go back to kind of history of football, right, and look way back, it was anytime people blitzed and they brought 6, there was 5 left to cover, there's 5 receivers, it was man-to-man automatically, right? In the late 90s, zone pressures became more and more popular, and what SMU does here is they drop out a bunch of guys. So it looks like from the beginning, and this is something where you have to be really disciplined, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they're trying to make it look like more of a man pressure. They're going to bring 6 guys. They only end up bringing 4, so it's a simulated pressure, right? Look like we're bringing more than you can handle, but really at the end of the day, only end up blitzing 4 guys. I think what helps TCU, though, Jamie, is the experience in the offensive line that we've talked about all throughout camp in these couple games. Mm-hmm. The communication has really been, for everything we see and hear, is pretty stout, and they've done a great job communicating up front, and that'll really help them in situations like this.
So talk to me, too, about, the impact that maybe TCU's tight ends can have against a defense like this, because they've got some incredibly athletic tight ends in Jorquarius Spivey and Jared Wiley, who it seems to me, based on the threats that TCU has at wide receiver and running back, might be able to take advantage of some things, especially in that kind of second level of the defense. Yeah,
I think you're right. And I think, what you need to do for a team that's not going to play man-to-man, right? You're not going to be able to take, shots down the field, big time, running shakes or skinny posts and that kind of stuff down the field all the time. You have to be okay with throwing the ball underneath, in those high-low situations on offense, throwing the ball to tight ends underneath, which eventually obviously open up that second level once they start getting jumped. But I think, if you're TCU at quarterback, you've got to be disciplined enough, and I think their quarterbacks are, and they're well coached, to be able to take that stuff underneath early in the game, to know that's gonna pay off, later in the game where they can get the ball down the field. One of the things SMU does here is, and again, you talked about those tight ends. If you get something underneath with a tight end, they actually run this low hole coverage. So if you watch, this safety is going to get down, get deep, deep third. This safety is going to play that low hole, okay, what they call so that mid-range. And what he's trying to do is if in those high-low situations, TCU says, okay, we're going to run a tight end underneath, and we're going to run some kind of dig behind it, well, now you've got someone to rob those digs, right? Mm-hmm. And it's going to look tempting. So this is definitely something to keep an eye on. This is tough coverage, when you're trying to high-low teams and do those things, or any kind of triangle read, that kind of stuff. You got to be aware of this low-hole player. And the reason they have an extra guy is because, again, they brought all this quote-unquote pressure, the simulated pressure, but at the end of the day, they only rush 4.
Yeah.
So now they have the extra guy to play the low hole and to help him rob some of those square ends and things like that.
That's interesting. And you think about a guy like Max Duggan's got 30 starts under his belt, 3 years of experience, coming off one of his best passing days of his career. This presents maybe an opportunity for him to show his skill set against a defense that is going to give him a little bit of a different challenge than he and Chandler Morris have seen in the first 2 weeks. Yeah,
there's no question. It is completely different. Again, the first 2 weeks they saw a lot of odd, obviously mostly odd, based on odd, both teams. This will be the first even man front that they've seen, 4 down, and they really don't play a lot of over, which is normally like a shade over the center. Mm-hmm. But it's been mostly even front, a lot of zone coverages. So you got to be disciplined at quarterback in those situations. I think they will. But again, if they do that, then they should have a big second half, really, and able to get the ball down the field, sort of the quote-unquote dink and dunk stuff, where they'll have bigger plays in the second half.
Awesome. Well, Coach, thank you as always for this film breakdown. Really appreciate your insight into this SMU offense and defense. It'll be very interesting to see how TCU, and what should be a really fun environment on Saturday, a lot of Horned Frog fans going over to Dallas. SMU, their attendance is ramped up this year as they continue to build momentum behind that program. It'll be really interesting to see how the Horned Frogs face this challenge come Saturday morning.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. I really am. It's gonna be a blast. I mean, there's a lot of excitement behind this one. We all know the storylines and all that stuff, but also at the end of the day, all that stuff is fun and it's great for fanfare and it's great for all the smack talk beforehand.
Yeah.
But honestly, James, we saw there's gonna be some really good football on Saturday too, and I'm fired up for that.
Really looking forward to it. Folks, this has been another episode of Facing the Frogs. I'm Jamie Plunkett. That's Coach David Beaudin. We'll see you at the game on Saturday, and we'll see you next week for a breakdown of Oklahoma. Go Frogs.
Roxo Media House.